Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm Steve Wiss. I'm with Jonathan Verdugba. These are really busy times up in Scandinavia, right in the heart of the season. The European qualifying matches have recently started as well. Jonathan, I'm sure you've been a really busy bee. I hope you're keeping well, my friend.
Hi, Steve, everyone. Good to be with you, my friend. And of course, we're back for another week's episode. Like you said, there's a lot going on. And I hope you're doing well too. I mean, we've got a ton of listener questions to go through, plus Europe, plus both leagues. So I've got a feeling we're going to be pretty busy in this episode. But how are you, my friend?
I'm quite well, thank you. I was actually involved in a cup final tonight. I was playing cricket in a cup final. First one I've been involved in about 10 years. Unfortunately, I didn't get a winner's medal, but it's the taking part that counts. No, not really. It's the winning that counts. But yeah, I'm doing all right. I must say that a bit of congratulations in order for you. Well, I think you were celebrating your birthday last week, I do believe. So many happy returns, belated happy returns for last week. I won't reveal your age, but I know you've got a bit of cake here on the side.
Touchy subject these days. I'm definitely. If I was football manager, mate, I'd be close to hanging up my boots. But yeah. So yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, last week I was actually our normal recording slot. I was having a juicy curry, mate. To be fair, so sorry for our listeners, maybe, but obviously we did have a bonus episode come out last week on Acor Adams. For those of you on patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast, of course, exclusive player analysis. We have Benny Traore, who's of course left the league now, and we've now got Acor Adams, who's about to leave the league now. So I know one of the Patreons is definitely active, aren't they, somewhere? But yeah, I think we're gonna get into these European games, because this is the time of the year where it's always a nice time of the year, isn't it, Steve, where our teams could potentially meet each other. And we've got European ties to look forward to, obviously midweek football. For those of you who I don't think we really talked about it, but the Häcken TNS game a couple of weeks ago, I have to tell you, Steve, I really enjoyed watching that on HD TV on Segoria. I was absolutely loving it, watching Allsvenskan in my living room, like properly massive screen. Yeah, really enjoyed that. So hopefully we get a few more ties like that. But I guess we can start with a couple of listener questions, and then we can get into the discussion. We've got Melvin at Malmberg Melvin, who says, "Who do you think will win between Häcken and Molde in a potential Champions League clash?" We've also got a couple of questions about just the general, who do we think will win in each tie and stuff like that. So I guess the best place to start, Steve, is maybe, do you want to give a bit of a rundown of the ties we have this week coming?
Yeah.
In Champions League and then maybe Conference League, and we can then have a little discussion about each team.
Yeah, certainly. And by the way, I was really enjoying watching. I watched both legs actually on the Welsh channel over here on HD, and it's funny because obviously, you know, the Welsh language is piping out. I had the wife was on the sofa, and about, I think, just into the second half, she was saying something like, "What language is this?" Like, because it's a lovely sounding language, Welsh. I really love it. I've been to Wales many times, and I think they're fantastic people. And there's but it's remarkably similar to English in some ways. Some of the expressions that come out, and I think my wife was a bit worried that she somehow finally realised after about 50 minutes that she'd actually been listening to a different language. So it was a very interesting watch in my household.
Yeah, you get sort of. I mean, I don't speak Welsh, so you know it's a beautiful language, and obviously we're not going to move into a Welsh heritage discussion, but you know, in terms of, I think there's a lot of work being done, isn't there, from sort of like Welsh people, nationalists, to keep the language going, because obviously English is like so predominant. But I do enjoy the tones, and like I don't understand a word they're saying basically, but it'll be like a bit of like Welsh chat, like Ibrahim Sadiq, like just like out of nowhere.
It's brilliant. I absolutely love it. Anyone who's listening who speaks Welsh, keep at it and keep that language going, because it's brilliant. I know you're a man of languages as well, Jonathan, and that sort of stuff. I really love languages around the world. But going back to the game, Häcken obviously got through pretty comfortably over two legs. Their reward is a match against the Faroese champions, KI Klasvik, who I have to say had one of the biggest shock wins in ever, really, I can remember in Champions League history. They went and beat Ferencvaros 3-0 away from home. They drew the first leg 0-0, which was a massive shock. And then they went to Hungary and won 3-0. And they were something like a 12-1 underdog. Like, there's no way I would have foreseen them getting a 3-0 win away from the home there. So, I actually watched that first leg. They're a very physical side. They're going to cause Häcken some physical issues. Think of the most physical sides in the Allsvenskan, maybe like a Varberg or something, but maybe a bit better quality. So they will be tested in that respect, but Häcken will be the favourites over the two legs. Now, there is a mouth-watering prospect for us after that, because the winners of that tie do face HJK Helsinki, the Finnish champions, or Molde, the Norwegian champion. So already we've got an interesting clash there. Molde will be the favourites over two legs to beat the Finnish champions. And we had this last year. It was nearly Malmö against Buda Glimt. Malmö let us down. We were desperate for that matchup. But so hopefully this year we finally get a champions of Norway against the champions of Sweden. Although I'm sure HJK and KI listeners will be hoping for the opposite.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. I feel like we should probably talk about the team maybe whilst we discuss them as well. In terms of Häcken, may as well sort of just get right into them. You've just mentioned their physical team. Do you know what, Steve? I'm not convinced they're gonna. I think Klaksvik have done every Scandinavian team a massive favour, because I think Ferencvaros, you would have expected them to probably cruise through that entire, bracket, wouldn't you? I would have thought maybe. So it's a massive shock. Yeah. It now opens up for every Nordic team, really, especially the fact they've all been drawn against each other. But Häcken are having a bit of a wobble, Steve. I mean, the weekend just gone. They've just lost 1-0 at Värnamo. And I have to say, I watched the game and I thought that Värnamo were good value for their win in the end of the day. Friend of the pod, Sam Hart, give him a shout out. I don't know if he's listening, but he mentioned a player, Ajay, who started in midfield for Värnamo, and he will look really good. I know Sam does a bit of work in Ghana, I think, places like that, and he had flagged him, and he made I think it was his league debut, and he looked phenomenal in midfield. I thought he was really good. Might be a talent to watch in future. And in general, Värnamo were just Häcken, I thought, were really sluggish, Steve. And I thought they really felt the loss of Benny Traore. Like, Ola Kamara started, he was subbed at half time. I can't see a future for him, really, based on how he's playing. They brought on Lajuni, of course, who got 2 goals in the week before against Bromma Poikina on his debut, Allsvenskan debut. He couldn't really do much either. One of the Gustafsson twins was injured, and I have to say, Steve, if you'd have asked me like a month ago or so, I'd have said that Häcken could walk through this whole qualifier. I would fancy them against Molde even. But if you're saying to me that Klaksvik are quite a physical team, I think that's something that Häcken might struggle up against, because I feel like the schedule has had a bit of an impact on them, and that defeat against Värnamo was very out of character. And I do think they still need a forward. I think they're going to be in the market to try and get someone in as soon as possible to replace Benny Traore, because they really look a bit light without him. So I do think this could be quite an open tie. I don't know the quality of Klaksvik. You'll tell me more. But I do feel like this isn't as much of a given as I would have probably said like 2 weeks ago or so with Häcken, because I feel like they are just having a little bit of a wobble.
The one thing I will say that Klaksvik don't have now, they don't have the surprise factor on their side, because everyone is going to be a lot more ready for them again. They would have sat up when they see them beat Ferencvaros 3-0. So there's no way Häcken will go into that game with any sort of complacency or anything like that. I agree with you. I watched a bit of that Värnamo game as well. Värnamo are an absolute devil of an opponent, aren't they, for when they're an underdog, I must say. But I think they lost 1-0 against Halmstad as well earlier in the season. I think there was another match where they lost 1-0 at Diff. So Häcken do have some issues against that sort of side, maybe. But you've got to think overall, even though they haven't got Benny Traore now, a bit of extra quality, especially in the home leg, which will be the second leg, may well unlock Klaksvik. But there's no guarantee they'll go there and beat them. I think a draw in the Faroes is not a bad result at all. They're really, you think about Stoke City on steroids. Like the long throw, it's not a very wide pitch, so that throw-in goes well into the penalty area. Corners and free kicks, big lads up there trying to make a nuisance of themselves. That's what they're going to be dealing with in the Faroes. So no gimme for Häcken, but I mean, I think over 2 legs, I would personally expect them to go through. But after you've got Klaksvik deserve some respect now after that result against Ferencvaros, don't they? Really?
Yeah, I think it will be a bit of a battle, like you said, and I'm just looking at who's going to be battling in that team. And if you look at the fixtures, Steve, they're Häcken are playing Elfsborg this week, and that's going to be a massive game in the title race as well. So they've got to keep that in the back of their mind. So I really think this is a huge week for Häcken, just not only in Europe but in the Champions, sorry, in the league as well. They've just made a lot of money from the Gothia Cup, which was last week, the world's biggest youth tournament. Fantastic occasion. I was sad not to be there, but I do love the Gothia Cup. But if we move on to Molde before we make our predictions for both teams, they had a game on Saturday, Stephen. It's a massive win against Salzburg, isn't it? 5-1. Not necessarily a team that have been thrashing teams too much this season, Molde, but Eric Catalano with a hat-trick, and then Lovic and Linus scoring as well. How much confidence do you think this gives them going into sort of quite a big game against HJK Finnish opposition?
A lot of confidence. I actually think Molde are playing the best football out of any team in the Eliteserien right now. It's been well documented at the start of the season. They dropped a lot of daft points, really. Some strange games where their metrics were still very good, but they're now winning a lot of matches, and it's not the style they're doing it as well is very impressive. 5-1, 4-0 in the last 2 matches. They're actually now really making the most of this squad. They're rotating players. The manager's put some guys in, like Eric Catalano has been in magnificent form. He was on the bench for most of the season. Suddenly he's been thrown into the first team starting regularly, and he's made the most of it. They look a well-oiled side again. I mean, they battered Brann 9th of July, 2-0. It could have been 6 or 7, and probably 4 or 5 by half-time. So I'm really quite optimistic for Molde. I think they're hitting form. This doesn't always happen. Often it's the opposite, in Europe. These teams from the previous season just lose players and they're never quite right for the European campaign. But they are absolutely hitting top form heading into these qualifiers. And I tell you what, with a bit of luck and all that, there's every chance Molde can be thinking we can make the group stage of this Champions League if they keep playing football like this. So I'm extremely impressed with them right now. I think playing better football than anyone in Norway.
There you go. And just looking at HJK's results at the weekend, they got a 1-0 win against Ilves. They're currently 3rd in the Finnish league, 4 points behind SJK. I believe the manager of SJK follows us on Twitter as well. So
I think they sacked their manager, HJK, recently. Something like that. So they're in a bit of a... for them to be only 3rd in their league is quite a crisis, really, I would say.
Yeah. So let's hear it then, Steve. It sounds pretty conclusive there, but who are you calling to go through in this one?
I think Molde will win both legs and go through 5-1 on aggregate.
5-1. And yeah, I've said that I think Häcken will probably just sneak through maybe by 1 goal. So I think maybe could be a scrappy 1-1, then maybe at home. I think they're beating them maybe 2-1 or maybe even 3-1. So let's answer the listener question that did come in, if that scenario was to take place. We won't discuss it too much because there's no point talking about things that don't exist, as wrestling fans may know. But who do you think will win between Häcken and Molde in a potential Champions League clash?
I'm going to have to go for Molde because I just think they're the more complete team overall. I think they are better defensively than Häcken. They've got probably slightly better structure than Häcken. And also, unfortunately, Häcken, I think their team has been slightly weakened since they won the title. So I would go Molde. What do you think?
I've not watched enough of Molde to say. So I'm going to watch the first leg and get back to you. On that one.
I love that answer, Jonathan.
I like to be informed rather than just a random punt. But I think you've watched a lot of both, so I do take your opinion.
There'll be goals. I'll tell you one thing: there'll be plenty of goals if they
really
both those teams met.
It'll be really exciting. I think we might need a Nordic trip there maybe for that one. By the way, I do like wrestling. I'm a big fan of Ric Flair memes. If you've seen Ric Flair memes on Instagram, that's a brilliant account. I'm not taking shots at wrestling for no reason. It comes from a place of love. But let's move on, Steve. On the later in the week, we've got Conference League. So let's just overview.
Yeah,
you want to recap
lot of matches.
Who's playing who?
Yeah, so I'm just going down here and talking about the teams from Norway and Sweden. we've got Jurgen against Luzern. I was actually in Luzern just a few weeks ago. Saw the stadium from a cable car. We've got Buda Glimt in action against Bohemians of the Czech Republic. Kalmar are against Punic from Armenia. We have got Crusaders, Northern Ireland against Rosenborg. Someone tweeted in they've got a ticket for that game. I think it might have been Showtime Berisha. He's off to that game, first leg. And who am I missing off? I feel like I'm missing someone off here, Jonathan. There's so many bloody damn games.
Hammarby.
I think that might be it. Hammarby, Twente against FC Twente. I said in my best Steve McLaren impression against Hammarby. So let's start there, actually, because you actually tweeted something on the NFP account on the weekend that you believe that Twente would be licking their lips at the prospect of playing this Hammarby side. So you don't give the Swedish outfit too much of a chance in this one.
Well, I just said to you sort of before we came on air recording, I think this is going to be a beating. I worry for Hammarby. Someone did actually ask a question, which is a little bit... I didn't even retweet it because I think he follows us, but it was a bit of a shot at Martí Cifuentes. Let me see if I can just quickly find it. It was something about the season at Hammarby so far, basically. But Sean at Sega_23 said, is Martí Cifuentes slowly destroying the chance of him getting a higher regarded manager position somewhere in Europe, which is pretty damning. But listen, they're not doing well this season, Steve. They lost at the weekend against Bromma Poikina. It was a fairly open game, but I have to say that I thought Bromma Poikina had more fight in them, which is a crazy thing to say, really, for a team like Hammarby. I thought going into this match, they'd just dominate. It's their Stockholm rivals, do you know what I mean? I thought usually the bigger team in that sort of derby match turns up, if you get what I mean. It's pride's at stake. And of the big three in Stockholm, of course, Bromma Poikina are kind of like comfortably fourth. So, they're like the little brother of every other team in Stockholm. So for them to sort of punch Hammarby on the nose was really surprising, I have to say. They played really well, fully deserved the win, I thought. Obviously, Hammarby did hit the post and there were one or two incidents, but listen, Steve, FC Twente is a totally different level to Bromma Poikina, and I think they're going to batter them, to be honest. I see this aggregate win being about 5-0, or maybe a little bit more. I've said it before with Hammarby. The problem with them is that they're always a team that's going to be good tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes, Steve. Because at the end of the day, they're always building players to sell on, and by the time they're good, it's too late because the league's gone. So I've regularly questioned Hammarby in terms of what is their strategy. Do they just want to sell players and bring in young players and just do that forever, or do they want to win titles at some point? The Spurs tag is very apt for them, I think. And listen, there's nothing wrong with player development. Like, I think they've got a massive fan base. They're a really well supported club. We just got support. We just got followed today actually by a Hammarby YouTube account. So I want to give a shout out to Wolf's Eye 92. They've only got 22 followers, but I had a little look at their stuff and it looks quite good. So I don't know if they're listening to this. They just followed us today, but yeah, if you are, then give us a shout out because I like the work you're doing. But yeah, Hammarby are quite a big club, and I just think that they're not just they've got quite a young squad. It's not the most mobile team, I don't think. I think they're going to really struggle against Twente on that pitch away from home. So yeah, I don't see this going well, Steve. I think 3-0 I could easily see a 3-0.
Tomorrow Never Comes. Wasn't that a Bond film? I'm trying to think. It was something like that. No, I think it might have been Tomorrow Never Comes. But I mean, will they die another day? That's the other question with Hammarby. Very good. I watch Hammarby quite a bit, and I have a problem with them. I've not a clue which version is going to show up. So that's a difficult thing, isn't it, in football, when a side's got more faces than Big Ben? You
nearly supported them at one point. You were borderline.
They are my favorite. They are my favorite team in Stockholm.
You were the borderline supporting them. It might have been a Hammarby shirt on your wall.
Probably my most favorite team in Stockholm. But at the minute, yeah, I mean, we've talked about Cifuentes a few times. I still think he's a good manager. And teams can have a poor year, and that's just
by the way, I would defend Cifuentes in this situation because I don't think he's actually in control of player like recruitment there in terms of like, he's not a stupid man. He's a clever man. I'm sure he would want more established players to build a squad with a bit more experience, but they always just have really young talents. And don't get me wrong, they're really good young talents. These players are all going to go on to have great careers, and they'll probably all be sold within a year for big money. So it's not really a criticism of the players or the manager. It's just Hammarby as an organisation. They do tend to sort of play those young talents so they can develop them. I think Victor Jukanovic is a fantastic young talent. I think he's been exceptional this season. Probably their best player of those young crop. But yeah, my prediction for that one is a comfortable win. Just to run through the rest of them quite quickly so we can move on. I think from a Swedish point of view, of course, I think Djurgården Luzern is going to be a fascinating tie. What version of Djurgården is going to show up, we don't know. Obviously, they've just lost 4-0 against Elfsborg at home, which we're going to talk about. I'm looking forward to discussing that in the Swedish section. So I find that one really hard to predict, of course, without knowing too much about Luzern. Steve, you might have an opinion. But let's just quickly move on to the Norwegian teams as well. Glimt Bohemians, Crusaders Rosenborg. What are your thoughts on those two games in terms of who goes through?
I think, with no disrespect to Northern Ireland teams.
Oh, sorry, and I've forgotten Kalmar, by the way, so we won't forget them, but we'll come back to them in a bit.
Yeah, Crusaders. Rosenborg should be beating them, really. And Rosenborg have actually now won their last 2 games. We probably won't talk about them that much in this episode, but they are looking a lot better now. So I think, and for Rosenborg, their priority now is going to be European football this season as well, because they're not going to finish in the medal positions. Realistically, they're not going to go down. So European football is really big for them. I think they'll be putting their heart and soul into this qualifying campaign. So I'd be surprised if they don't get past the Crusaders. The winners of that tie could potentially be facing Scottish opposition, Hearts. I think Hearts are already through to the next round, or might be through to the next round anyway. But so that's my prediction. There is Rosenborg fairly comfortably, I think, over 2 legs. They might not win in Northern Ireland, but this should comfortably win at home. Bodø Glimt against Bohemians. I've got to admit, Czech football is not an area of my expertise at all, to be honest, Jonathan. So I'm actually not really going to give too much of a prediction here. You would probably expect Glimt to win, but maybe Bohemians are better than we think. So that's a tough one.
What I'll ask you instead then, tell me about the 16-year-old at Rosenborg, Sverre Hauseth Nipan. A lot of talk about him I saw on social media.
He scored
the winner.
He scored a goal, the winning goal. Yeah. It was a bit of a lucky goal, I thought. Kind of the keeper was involved in deflection here and there, but he put himself about. And one thing I noticed about this Rosenborg team at the weekend, there's a lot of youngsters in it now. And whether this is a thing that Svein Marlin is bringing into the fold now he's taken over as manager, I've said for years, haven't I? They've been crying out to promote more of the youngsters into the team, not just the really good ones. So it was actually really good to see. I'm just going to get the whole lineup and the bench now, but
I see James really Nelson up front, 20-year-old.
Yeah, there's some real youth in there, Jonathan. Over, not just on the starting 11. I mean, Leo Kornic at the back. You got Ed Pereira at left back, Nipan, Nelson. I think Nelson's actually come into his own recently. There wasn't an old team, and this Rosenborg lineup has been really old in the last few years. So I like it. I like the direction that they're heading. Some of this is because of injuries, and it's been forced on him. But I really noticed the athleticism and the pace and the closing down and the enthusiasm and the energy. I like the direction they're heading in suddenly.
Okay, so it's hard to tell, obviously, with the opposition. There's no point predicting if you don't know the opposition.
Well, the Bodø Glimt game, I won't.
No, that's fine. It's fine. In terms of Kalmar against Punic, I just give a shout out to Over Peterson. We need to get him on the pod at some point. He livens up my weekend every weekend. If you don't know about him, he's someone on Twitter who does sort of these match previews. He reminds me of a sort of old man sort of version of Super Mario. He's a delightful character. And we wish Kalmar well, just for him as well as our good friend Wasson on the show. We're going to talk about Kalmar a little bit in the Swedish section as well. That game against Varbergs boys was a bit of controversy in that one. But yeah, I've got to be honest. I think Kalmar's lack of experience in Europe and quite a thin squad, I think that might bite them a little bit. I don't know a huge amount about Punic, so maybe they could pull out an upset. I noticed Rajovic was taken off at the week in this game after 60 minutes, maybe potentially saving him for Europe, that kind of thing. But I have to say, I probably would fear for Kalmar, just based on the level of maybe a team in that league. Punic, from what I understand, are not too bad. So
I watched Punic. I watched Punic in the previous round, believe it or not. And it's a tough place to go. I think Kalmar need to win the first leg at home. Otherwise, they'll head out, in my opinion. So if they don't get a result in the first leg, they're in massive trouble because it's just an awkward place to go. Armenia, and the crowd really get behind them over there, and they're going to struggle in that away leg, in my opinion.
Yeah, and of course, if they actually win that game, it's match 17, I believe, Steve. They would play
Buda Glimt or Bohemians.
They could play Buda Glimt, which would be incredible, especially for Ricardo Friedrich. He's had a few sending offs in the last few weeks, but he's obviously a former club is Buda Glimt, so that would be very special for him. He's not suspended for the European game, so I'm sure he'd be happy about that. Let's move on then. We've done the European ties more or less. Steve, is there anything else we need to touch upon, or should we get into the?
We can get stuck into other areas now.
Let's do it then. Should we flip a coin? Sweden or Norway? Where do you fancy?
Well, I think it might be a good section just to do filling a few things with Norway.
Let's do
to do it. So I know I'm going to talk a little bit about OBOS in this section, which makes a bit of a difference, and also a couple of teams which don't get a mention that often about Eliteserien matters. So quiz me away, Jonathan. Also a few questions, of course.
We've got a ton of listener questions, so if we don't get to read out your question, then we do appreciate you at Nordic Footpod, and also questions on YouTube that come up every now and then. We really appreciate your support on both platforms. Steve, like I said to you, of course, we discussed it beforehand. This episode, we're going to give a bit of a limelight to some of the teams we haven't necessarily given a huge amount of limelight in recent weeks. So the likes of Kalmar, we've got Ham Kam coming up in a minute, Odd even. Varberg, we're going to discuss a little bit in detail as well. Sirius. So a few sort of teams under the radar maybe going to get a bit of love as well as the bigger boys. So let me start you off with a listener question. You were right about Showtime Barisha, by the way. He tweeted us ticket bought for the Crusaders Rosenborg game. So loyal supporter of the podcast at Barisha Show. I hope you enjoyed that one. I'll start with his question actually, Steve. Is there anyone you can see that will get close to Glimt this season? Or are they going to cruise to the league title? And just tell us how they got on this weekend as well.
Buda Glimt at one point were actually losing this weekend 2-1 at Sandefjord, which is the equivalent of Manchester City going 2-1 down against the team in the relegation zone. It was a big shock, but they came back to win 5-2. They should win the title from here just because of the start that they've had to the season, but they have shown signs recently of chinks in their armour. They dropped a few points. I think Buda Glimt only play for certain periods in games now. I think they are intense for 20-25 minutes, but then ease off the gas a bit. And I think that might be perhaps they're looking at the whole season in terms of European matches, making sure they stay fresh for the whole campaign all the way through to December. So it might be quite smart, whereas in the past they would be gung-ho for 90 minutes full on and they'd be battering teams. They don't always rack up the score now. But they should win the league. Like I said before, the one team that could catch them, they can't not catch them, but the one team that have got the quality, that got the squad is Molde. Only now are they starting to find the form. They've got a massive 12 points to find, though, with only 14 games remaining, which I think is too much. Even if Molde won every single game remaining, I think Buda Glimt would still win the title. So, although it would certainly make them sweat. I think they're the only team. There will be Viking fans listening to this. There will be Tromsø fans listening to this. Maybe even Brand fans listening who are thinking, you know what, we can still give it a go here. But in my personal opinion, Molde are the only team that could catch them because they've just got the quality.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the table, as you said there, Viking second, they've got a game in hand on Glimt, and if they win the game in hand, they'll be 6 points off it. So, of course, there's some hope for Viking fans playing quite well at the moment. I think we probably do need to have a chat about them at some point, Steve. I feel like they've gone under the radar slightly a little bit at times.
They have a little bit, yeah.
Let's discuss a different listener question, though, on the same subject. How have Buda adapted to the departures of Vettelsen and Mvuka? And that's a question from Guppy FPL at Guppy Fish.
Yeah, good question. Thanks for that one. I think the right wing area is a lot easier for them to replace. Mvuka was operating there and cutting inside. So Nino Zugay came in for a bit. He's injured once more. I wish he could stay fit because I think there's a great player in him. But Sondre Surley came in the weekend, last few weeks. He missed most of last year. I think it was ACL. But another inverted winger type player who cuts in off the right-hand side. It's like a conveyor belt. Bodø/Glimt have a conveyor belt of talent there in that spot. Vettelsen's position is a bit harder to replace, but they have signed Tobias Gulliksen from Strømsgodset. I think the transfer goes through 1st of August. He will be a like-for-like replacement for Ugo Vettelsen, and I think he will go from strength to strength. That's a fantastic addition to replace Vettelsen with.
Yeah, and I have to say it's a testament to Glimt's recruitment. They seem to... One thing about them, the reason they've been top for quite a few years now, and this is probably the 3rd or 4th year we've been talking about Glimt, and it does seem to me, Steve, as if their recruitment is quite on point. They're almost getting into sort of a buying situation, aren't they, where they take the best players from like the other teams in the league because of the finances maybe, and that also takes good talent ID, doesn't it? You need to spot these players and go all out for them. Stop teams like Rosenborg getting them, who are traditionally maybe a little bit bigger. So fair play to Glimt for that, because we probably haven't spoken about them a huge amount this season. We have answered this question from Matthew Gurney at Messi RAFC. I'm just going to give him a quick shout out. We have answered this question from Matthew Gurney. He said, excluding Buda, who do you think will get the remaining European spots this season? And how do you think all the Norwegian clubs will fare in Europe, especially considering the upturning results from Molde and RBK, which we've kind of discussed? But yeah, thanks for the question, Matthew. Hope you enjoyed that section we just put together now. I think I'm going to move on to, there's a fun one here from Jimmy Driver. I'll save it though for a minute. We're going to have to talk about VAR, aren't we?
Oh, well, just before VAR, let me just do a top 4 prediction now. And I'm going to go Bodø/Glimt, Molde, Viking, and go on, we'll put Tromsø in 4th just to appease the Tromsø listeners. But yeah, go on, VAR then. Okay. I can't believe this. Every single week.
Since you're skipping to Tromsø, I'm going to ask Carl Wilgate's question, but you don't have to answer it because we have talked about Tromsø quite a few times. We had a lot of questions about them in recent weeks. But at Carl_Wilgate, thanks a lot for asking your question. What's the reason behind the strong season by Tromsø? And do you feel it will continue or it will drop off like Lillestrøm last season? Just answer the last part of that question, Steve, because I know you've talked about them on recent weeks quite a lot in terms of how they've been doing this season. Just tell us, do you think next season, do you think they'll drop off, or do you think this is something a trend that can continue in 30 seconds?
What's the reason behind them doing well? Good recruitment, good managerial tactics, good setup behind the scenes. Can they continue it? Possibly, because I like the direction that club's going. Just you just look at certain clubs and you think, yeah, they're well run, they're going in the right direction, positivity. So yeah, I think Tromsø are a club on the up, and it's not a bad time to side with them. If they play the cards right, they can be a top half Eliteserien club regularly, in my opinion.
Great stuff. Thank you for your question, Carl, as well as the other questions we have from everyone. We've got some really good questions this week, as I've mentioned. I think we're going to move on to the VAR question, which we can't avoid. What did you think of the Stabæk supporters anti-VAR protest? That's from the Journeyman at TJM podcast. And just by the way, if you haven't seen that video, we posted it on our Twitter account, Steve, and I believe it's close to 1 million views. When we went viral, I mean, hashtag sort of like flames emoji or whatever. Like we've gone viral. So if you haven't seen the video, obviously go on our Twitter at Nordic Football. But in short, Stabæk supporters bought a ticket for this match, or had a season ticket. When the game started, in the process at VAR, they walked out of the stadium. And I believe Ham Kam have done a similar thing this weekend. And of course, it's definitely touched the nerve because there was so many retweets, people saying like they should do this in the Premier League, fans should walk out. Like, it's clearly a very touchy subject. What do you think? What did you think about that, Steve? And I don't know if you have any other comments about VAR, but
the Journeyman, thank you very much for your question. The Journeyman's put me on the golf course here because he's teed me up really high, hasn't he? What did I think about the protest? I loved it. I absolutely think it's about time it was done. But let's talk about the reason this was actually done in the first place. It's because of, really, I think that the straw that broke the camel's back was the terrible decision that Starbeg had against Sandefjord, which we talked about in the previous episode, actually. A goal which was disallowed for no real apparent reason, but it took like 5 or 10, well, not 10 minutes, but about 5 minutes for the decision to be made. And I think fans are getting fed up with VAR across the world, really. But I feel like the Scandinavian folk are always a set of people who will act on stuff, a bit like the French in a way. If they don't like something, they will vote with their feet. They will protest. They will make things heard. And fair play to that. It's like, could you imagine that being done over here in the Premier League? I don't think fans have got the bollocks, to be honest.
Never.
I really don't. Exactly. So I think it's fantastic to see, because VAR at this point in time has not worked very well in the Eliteserien. It just hasn't. I don't think anyone can really say it has. So I think it was a good thing from the Starbucks supporters, the Ham Kam supporters. There may well be more as well. This weekend I was watching some matches in Denmark, and I couldn't believe some of the decisions, the harshness of it. Look, it's a debate for we could do a whole show on VAR. We need to do it, don't we? Like, we need to get in 2 or 3 guests and we actually talk about VAR properly.
God, please no. No, I know what you mean. And to be fair, we have a question from Wasson, Oscar Hull, coming in part 2. Kalmar VAR questions. So like you say, it's a hot topic.
Yeah, it really is a hot topic, and I don't think we're going to see the last of it. And I do wonder, whether could there be enough pressure put on the Norwegian FA that they got rid of VAR? I mean, it seems almost unthinkable. We've always said, VAR is here to stay now.
Put it this way, right? Put it this way. Maybe, like, obviously we've done the VAR discussion, and we're probably going to do it again in part 2. But let me ask you a different question. How do you think this plays out? Because if you actually think about it, right? Imagine if every single Norwegian team was like, right, we're not going to games anymore until VAR is scrapped, right? VAR is a FIFA dictate, right? It can't be like, we are basically commenting on the last 2 leagues who actually have some sort of like anti-VAR, like solidarity. There's no VAR in Sweden, and by the reaction to that video from Swedish fans and even Danish fans, if VAR is introduced in Sweden, I mean, we're going to talk about AIK Malmö in a minute. I'm not even sure we're going to complete 90 minutes in some games. So how do you think this actually plays out? Because obviously, from a regulatory standpoint, it's quite difficult to get into the fundamentals of it. But this is just an impossible situation, right? The VAR is going to be introduced in both leagues eventually, right? It's not going to. FIFA aren't going to back down and say, okay, we'll let Norway and Sweden not have VAR, but every other league in the world, or UEFA, does. So how would you actually see this playing out from your point of view? Because imagine if Norway did scrap VAR now, the precedent that would set for other leagues, fans, especially like you just mentioned, they're France. I'd imagine they'd be on it like a flash. So how does this actually play out, like, in your mind from here?
I think it's a wake-up call for VAR across the world. I think the system, we're never going to get rid of it. I think it needs refining, and I just wonder if this might be the wake-up call that it needs in some fashion. I feel like eventually, in 10 years' time, where are we? We're probably at a system which is a lot more accepted, and we've probably got to a system which works. Look, it did take the likes of tennis, cricket, several years to get to where they are now, where, not saying everyone's happy with it, but they're a lot more satisfied with it. And I think that's what will happen with VAR. But you know what soccer's like, what football's like? Things always take forever, don't they? But I tell you what, if the Norwegian FA suddenly said, okay, we're scrapping VAR, my word, that would be a strong message, wouldn't it? And it would make other fans from other countries perhaps interested in staging their own protests. So this could be, if FIFA are not careful, it's a can of worms that they need to close very, very quickly.
Can of worms, and as anyone who's ever tried to eat a can of worms knows, it's not very pleasant, and it's not something you can do too quickly either, I'd imagine. So we'll leave that discussion there. But if you've got a thought on it, we had loads of comments, tweets. So thank you so much for engaging in that debate, because it was very interesting. Obviously, like I said, 1 million views on our little Twitter account. But I'm going to move on to two teams that, as I mentioned, that we do need to talk about, and then I'm going to have a quick discussion, a quick fire round on OBOS. Ham Kam, Steve. A big shout out to Tom and Dent. I'm sure he's listening to this, and if you are Tom, you're due to WhatsApp me at some point and tell me how things are going. You might be even due a return to the pod, isn't it? A yearly sort of appearance. But what's going on with Ham Kam, Steve? It sort of seems to be picking up form.
Well, I suppose this is a good time to actually talk about the bottom of the table, the Eliteserien, the bottom 5 or 6 at this point in time. Allsvenskan on 7 points, Sandefjord on 10, Vålerenga on 11 points. I think we'll save them for another day. Ham Kam have now won their last 3 games to move to 16 points. Stabæk, who they've just beaten, are on 16 points as well. And Haugesund, who, continue to find a way to get results every now and then, are actually on 18 points. So Ham Kam, 3 wins in a row. I don't think too many people saw this coming, Jonathan, because they lost, I think it was something like 9 out of 10 league games. It might have been 8 out of 9, actually, with only a 0-0 draw in the middle of it. So they looked like they were kind of gone, really, a bit. It happens in football. Teams just go on these runs and they can never get out of it. But now they've won 3 in a row, and fair play to them. I think you've got to give a lot of credit to the mentality of the team. The last 2 fixtures in particular against Elfsborg and Stabæk, you could say they've maybe been second best in both games, but they found ways to win both games 3-2. They've scored goals at the right times in games. They've managed to be mentally strong when needed. And also, they've took the bull by the horns when they've needed to. They were 1-1 against Allison with 10 minutes to go, scored a winning goal. They were 2-0 up against Stabæk, dragged back to 2-2, scored in the 94th minute to win. So they have taken the bull by the horns in both those games. They went to Sarpsborg. Yes, Sarpsborg missed chances, but Ham Kam went there to create their own opportunities. So I think it's a great comeback from where they were. It looked like them and Sandefjord and Allison were going to be the bottom 3. But now they've come out of it with 3 wins in a row. I think it gives them a new perspective on things. And they've put pressure on those, certainly Sandefjord, Allison below them. Vålerenga under pressure as well. I don't think they'll go down. I don't think anyone thinks Vålerenga are going to go down or even finish in the bottom 3. But we have seen big teams go down before. So, but I've been pretty impressed with Ham Kam's mentality. And I want to congratulate everyone associated with the club on those 3 wins in a row.
Yeah, congratulations. It sounds like they're on the up. The table's looking a little bit nicer for them as well. Let's move on to Odd, this team you don't speak about too much.
Now I'm wondering why I actually put them on the itinerary because I don't know what I'm joking, Odd. Or what can I say about them? I have watched their last
decent
2
goalkeeper.
games. Yeah, and they've got a veteran right back who is back in form, Espen Ruud, who must be about 50 by now. I think he's about 39 or 40. But what is it about this guy? He's like eternally young. When you think we've written him off, he comes back and he scored 20 fantasy points in 1 game against Allison, 2 goals and an assist. He's still on the set pieces, and he scored the winner against Vålerenga at the weekend from the penalty spot, and he loved it. You'd think someone at his age, you've seen it all, but he celebrated wildly like he was a teenager, which was great to see, really. And this Odd team, I find them really difficult to predict, and you don't know which version of them is going to show up. They can be anything on the day. But they're over the last year and a half under Paco Johansson, they have played some good football at times, and they're in a good run again. I just feel like they're in the mid-table, but we never talk about Odd, do we? Ever. I just don't know what it is. We just never really, apart from Valstedt, we don't ever really say an awful lot.
Bromby, is that correct?
Well, I think the latest seems to be that's his destination. And he's been linked with, I know it's the old proverbial thing, but literally more clubs than Tiger Woods. I think he was going to Troyes in France at one point, which should have been interesting. But everyone knows he's a top-class goalkeeper. And I suppose that is a step up, isn't it, to Brøndby, big club in Denmark. So I don't know the late. I mean, there's so many transfer rumors and stuff now. I don't actually know the latest in that particular deal. It would be a big loss for Odd, but their veteran Espen Ruud showing that it's not always about the youth, eh?
Yeah, good stuff. And hey, there's nothing wrong with being in that sort of age. Let's put it that way. Let's move on. Steve, tell us about the OBOS League. This is the second division in Norway, by the way. I'm conscious of time because we are sort of pushing the 45-minute mark, maybe. We've still got part 2 to come. So let's keep this fairly brief. We could maybe have a longer discussion in the coming weeks because they're on a summer break at the moment. But just give us an overview of where we are in that second division, because it's a league that sort of started to take your interest lately, hasn't it?
It has. I think the standard in OBOS has got better in the last couple of 2 or 3 years. So that's why I've taken more of an interest in it. And they are on this summer break. If anyone's listening who knows the reason why no matches have been played between the 2nd of July, the 9th of July and the 4th of August, then do let me know, because I'm baffled why in the middle of summer you don't play any matches in your second tier. Actually more than half the pitches are artificial in this level now, but it doesn't make sense to me. I'm sure there's a reason out there somewhere. Do get in touch if you know it. But I'm really interested in the league this season because one of my, I'm not going to call them one of my favourite teams in Norway, but one of the most intriguing clubs in Norway could be online for a promotion, and that is Fredrikstad, who have one of the biggest club stadiums in the country. I think it's like 3rd or 4th biggest in Norway. And this is a massively well-supported club who have been in bad times in the last 5-6 years. There's interesting. They're up in second place. They're unbeaten after 15 games. They've only conceded 7 goals in 15 matches. Had quite a few draws in that, but they are in second place, just behind Kongs Vinja, who are managed by a former guest of the podcast, Vegard Hansen, who is Mjøndalen manager for about 15 years. So there's a really interesting story there. Hansen, he's like, who was the manager over here who always used to get promoted from the Championship to the Premier League? Mick McCarthy sort of thing. A couple of others as well. Warnock, Bruce. So I think that's Vegard Hansen's definitely the man to get you out of OBOS, isn't he? So they're doing really well. That's an interesting story. And then, there's a few bigger teams like Kristiansund, Start, Ranheim, Mjøndalen, perhaps Sandnes as well, who are not doing as well as they would want this season in that league. So it's an intriguing story. 16-team league, and there's always plenty of goals and plenty of action.
So top of the league at the moment is it actually Fredrikstad or?
Kongs Vinja by 2 points, 31 points for them. Fredrikstad 29. We've actually got Sogndal, managed by former Chelsea striker Tor Andre Flo, is in 3rd place. They're quite an attacking team, as you might expect. Kristiansund, who I think are the best squad in the league, they're in 4th. I think they've got normally this league is dominated by 1 or 2 teams. It could be the most exciting OBOS in a long time. There's about 5 or 6 teams genuinely in the mixer for the top 2 spots. So I think it's a fascinating conclusion. I mean, Brand won this league on about 80 points last year. Arlesson used to win this every year by about 70 points. It could be, really could go to the last game, So I think there's a lot of even teams in it, and there's some really good football being played in OBOS these days, Jonathan. It's an underrated league. It's getting better.
Testament to that is the departure of one of Mjøndalen's players to Groningen. I believe he's the league's top goal scorer. Can you just tell us a bit more about that? It seems obviously there's a few eyeballs on OBOS these days from foreign teams.
I think, this is unusual. Anyone good would normally, from the OBOS, would go to Eliteserien or another Scandinavian country. It's just the way it kind of works. So for him, Lian is the name of the guy. Christopher Lian, I think. I've never actually really seen him play much, to be honest with you. But yeah, straight to Groningen, which, obviously they must see something in him that makes them want to bypass Christian Strømland Lien has gone to Groningen, and I think they paid not far off £500,000 for him, which is a fairly significant fee for an OBOS player. Mjøndalen only signed him this time last year from a team called Floy, so he has rapidly come up 21-year-old, and he scored 10 goals this season in OBOS. Big step up to Eredivisie, but obviously this guy's developing really, really quickly. And you're 100% right. There's a lot more eyes on OBOS than there ever used to be.
Yeah, and he's joint top scorer in the league. I think he's ahead of the other scorer on non-penalty goals because he hasn't scored any penalties. Lean and
Benjamin Stokke is the other one.
I think Groningen got relegated, so I believe they might.
Oh, are they? Then, right, okay.
Yeah, but either way, it's like you said, that's quite a big fee for an OBOS team. So we'll just wrap it up. Like off the top of your head, 3 talents that you think the next sort of Lean is going to get sold, maybe from the OBOS League. Is there anyone that we should be listening to and keeping our eyes on in the second half of the season?
You've got me on the spot there, and I can't really give anyone. I need to do more research on that. But what I will say, I've noticed that there's often quite a lot of loan players that come down into OBOS from, say, Eliteserien or even from other parts of Scandinavia who develop their game and do really well. And I think Start, for example, I think Start had the lad who used to be, the guy who moved to Amia from Jack Lane. They had him for this season, and Lane broke his leg, I think, first game of the season, scored a goal and broke his leg.
He has no luck.
He has no luck at all. So they ended up having to bring in some good loanees in attack. And this is what happens in OBOS. It's a good breeding ground now to develop your game, certainly offensively anyway. And I will come back with some talents to watch in the next show, actually, for you, Jonathan. Not too many, obviously, but
I will fill the gap with one that I sort of caught my eye a little bit. I think Samuel Pedro at Yerv, 7 goals in 10 games. He's Portuguese, apparently.
Portuguese,
he's a former Benfica B player. He looks like a bit of a talent, I have to say. Only 22 years old, so I'll bail you out on that one, Steve. But I'm sure you know more about the league than me, that's for sure. But yeah, he's definitely one that has caught my eye at times. I'm keeping an eye on OBOS as we both like to do. So that'll do for part 1. You've done a great job there. When we come back in part 2, we're going to discuss Allsvenskan. And as we mentioned, they're going to talk about a few of the teams who haven't been spoken about. And you don't want to miss some of the discussions in this because it's going to get a bit fiery, literally, after the big game between Häcken and Malmö. We're going to talk about fan behavior in Allsvenskan and what's going on there. So stay tuned. Join us after this break.
Welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm Steve Wiss and I'm with Jonathan Verdugbo. We're going to be talking about the Swedish Allsvenskan now. I know Jonathan's pretty in a fiery mood today about certain topics, which I'm going to absolutely prod him with. So, but first of all, we did end that last segment talking about the OBOS Ligaen, and the reason was that because we had a question from Big Sig at Big Sig 5, who said he was looking forward to that segment. I hope you enjoyed it, Big Sig. But also, he asked a question, and he also asked a question previous week as well, which we didn't manage to get round to. What is the most significant transfer into and out of each league so far? So now, it's you can only pick one. I mean, obviously, with the Eliteserien transfer window, I just wanted, before you answer that, Jonathan, the transfer window in Eliteserien hasn't officially opened yet. So there have been signings made, but no one will actually be coming until August the 1st. And there'll be a lot more action then in that respect. Allsvenskan-wise, what have you got?
Yeah, thanks to Big Sig. Love the Twitter handle. You've even earned yourself a follow. So, that's what patience brings you on the Nordic Football Podcast. So thanks for waiting. Obviously, I think you asked it a few weeks ago maybe, and we didn't get around to it. So the persistence has paid off, and it's great that you got in touch again. I'm going to give 2 answers for this, simple like you've asked. Most significant transfer into the league, in my opinion, so far. Are we talking about just this window, Steve, or are we talking about the entire
season? Just this summer window, yeah.
Oh, that's a tough one. All right, that complicates it. But I'm just gonna say Pontus Jansson. It's very early, so you can't. There's no player that you can actually maybe give that title to right now because I think it's quite early. But I'm going to say Pontus Jansson just for the reason the AIK Malmö game, which we'll talk about in a minute, he hit the post with a late header, and I thought he was dominating the air. AIK are quite a strong team in the air. I actually thought he physically dominated every single AIK defender. He made like the likes of Papagiopoulos and Milosevic, who were big lads. He made them look like small men at certain times. He's a unit, Ponte Janssen, isn't he? I didn't realise how tall he is. I think he's going to have a big impact on the defence, Malmö, at some point. So I think that they needed that security with Derek Cornelius out. Biggest transfer out, in my opinion. It's a joint one. I think Hugo Larsson and Benny Traore are the two ones. Malmö have not been the same since Larsson left. That midfield is totally unstable, and he's a massive reason why. They obviously got a massive move to Eintracht Frankfurt for about 11 million, 12 million euros. And same with Benny Traore. We talked about it in part one. I think that they're missing him already up front. And they didn't look the same in terms of their attacking cohesiveness against Varnamo. So that's my answer.
The most significant transfer out of Eliteserien so far for me is Christopher Bonsu-Bar from Sarpsborg to Genk. And the reason for this for me is because of the price of it, 5.2 million. And I think that's significant because it just shows you a team like Sarpsborg can bring in a guy from next to nowhere in January. In fact, it wasn't even January. It was like February or March. And they can make 5 million euros on him in the space of 5-6 months. And I think that's something in the past, we've often said, teams are getting players for really like cheap as chips at times. And you think, wow, how, they're getting ripped off teams in Norway. Now I think there's a lot more money getting paid for these players. I mean, Vettelsen fetched nearly 8 million by Club Brugge. Now, I don't know whether Belgian football suddenly got a lot of money, but 5.2 million for an 18-year-old winger who'd only played, 5 months for Sarpsborg, I think that really stuck in my mind as significant. I can't really give a significant transfer into the country yet because I don't think there's actually been anything official. So, yeah, Bonsu-Bar.
Yeah, and anyone who actually listens to our Patreon will have known about Bonsu-Bar because he was in your 10 to watch, Steve, I believe. So a shout out to you again, patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast, player analysis, and also access to our 10 to watches, which are quite popular every year, and they're available to view now still in video format. And Bonsu-Bar is one of them who's of course left the league. But yeah, thank you to Big Sig, and let's get into Sweden. I'm excited.
We certainly will. Yeah, Van Persie enthusiast at Janu Zashchan. I know I've pronounced that wrong, so I do apologise. I butchered that one. Asks, what did Elfsborg do right to be this good this season? And this is a great place to start because we have to talk about the incredible 4-0 win that Elfsborg had against Djurgården at the weekend in Stockholm. So answer that question, Jonathan. Also, let's talk about this match.
Yeah, it's another. I think it's Januzaj, isn't it? That's a shout out to Adnan Januzaj. I think that's a Januzaj stan. But yeah, shout out to him. I've seen him ask a lot of questions, or him or her ask a lot of questions in the past. Really appreciate your support, Steve. I did not see this coming. I couldn't actually believe what happened. Obviously, there was a controversial penalty, which Djurgården fans on Twitter were clearly very upset about. They talked a lot about that. I've seen Elfsborg fans on Twitter calling Jimmy Tellin Golden Jimmy. Might be a little bit premature, but they're getting excited. He's definitely becoming a meme, and you start to feel when a set of fans really start to love their manager, isn't it? You start to see the memes, and you start to see the sort of songs and whatever, that kind of thing. I just don't think you understand all those sort of songs, don't you? If it was England, the Arteta song and stuff like that. But yeah, he's becoming a bit of an icon there at Elfsborg, and he's slowly building a ship, Steve. And this ship looks like it's going all the way to the gold. Because Djurgården have one of the best, if not the best, I think, home record in the league this season. You might correct me. They're a solid team at home. I've noticed this season they get quite a lot of decisions at home as well. They're the sort of team that, if I was sort of equivalating them in England, maybe you'd say like it's a bit like going to Anfield in a way or something like that, where decisions tend to, as Mr. Torstensson at Mjällby might say, got very vocal on Twitter. Decisions tend to go their way at times this season. I've noticed, and they tend to do well at home. They beat Häcken, they beat Malmö at home, I think, Stevie, I think you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but Elfsborg went there and just destroyed them, absolutely destroyed them. First half blew them away, game was over. And in terms of answering this question, what have they done to turn it around? It's just like, it's almost total football, actually. What Elfsborg are doing is really, it's very exciting to watch, I have to say. We slept on Elfsborg for a few years, didn't we? And I've always said Jimmy Tellin, he was so highly rated as a young manager at Jönköping. And I said at times I didn't quite understand why. Just from my own ignorance, it's not like a criticism. It was just like, he started this job at Elfsborg sort of up and down. But this season, Steve, he's built them into a complete unit. The fullbacks can play. You've got Hult and Larsen, just two experienced fullbacks who are just, let's be honest, they're way above the league level. They actually shouldn't be in Allsvenskan, in my opinion. Obviously, they've got affinity to Elfsborg, and I've said it in previous shows. They're both just like Rolls Royces in this league. I have to be honest. Larsen, I tried to hate him for quite a few years, Steve, as I saw him in your fantasy team, and I refused to bring him into my team. But he's like a Trent Alexander-Arnold, like goals, assists, clean sheets. The guy can do it all in his stride. He's unbelievable. The centre backs, I mean, they were missing one of their main centre backs this week, and it didn't really show. I thought that would be an issue for them. I thought missing one of their main centre backs might be a problem, and that's why I thought your guy might get something. But clean sheet. You got in midfield. You got players like Andre Roma who can pass the ball about, ping it. Baidu's a decent player, and then you've got up front. They don't even miss like Jacob Ondrejka. I mean, he moved to Belgium obviously, and he started his first game I think at the weekend, and you wouldn't even know he's left Elfsborg. You wouldn't miss him. Jeppe Ockels and Bernhardsen. I mean, I took Ockels out of my fantasy team. I'm massively regretting that one because I think he got 15 points, but he was unbelievable, unplayable. And then up front, obviously, I still think they lack a top striker. Really, I think Per Frick and Ida Gudjonsson's son, I believe it is, Sven Gudjonsson, is a little bit. I think if they got a top striker, I would really fear for the rest of the league for the next year or two, because they're almost, like I say, the complete side. They can press, they can sit deep, they get on your backs, like they don't give you a minute's rest. They can pass it, they can get down the flanks, they can counter attack. They're giving me Beko Häcken vibes actually in terms of how they're playing and just dismantling teams. So I hope that answers the question. But yeah, I think it's almost. I'd almost consider them title favourites now. I think the hurdle is going to be mentality. Like, can they continue this? Because obviously the week before that, they had a wobble against EF Core, and I personally thought to myself that maybe they'll have a bit of a wobble now. They've got some tough games. They've got obviously Diff away, and then they've got Häcken. And I thought maybe this might be where they start dropping points, but they go to Häcken this weekend, and you'd almost consider them favourites, to be honest, like the way they're playing. So it's going to be that's good. I think that's almost the title decider. I think if they beat Häcken away, I think they're they're in the final third, if you know what I mean. But I think in terms of a statement win, I think if they've obviously got Malmö away coming soon as well. But I think if they beat Häcken away, it's almost psychologically like, and they've got no Europe as well. I don't think so. They're flying at the moment.
Well, it's interesting. Before this game, I was actually discussing this match from a betting angle with an American colleague, and I like the goals in it. I liked over 2.5. He didn't like my ideas. He was like, "You do know, Steve, that your Garten have kept 6 clean sheets at home this season." Statistically, he's like, he didn't think Elfsborg would score. But I don't know about you, midway through watching this game, I was thinking this lot are going to win the Allsvenskan. I was. But then again, the previous week against EF Core, they were not good enough. They struggled as a favourite. They struggled when the expectation was on their shoulders. So I don't know whether they just love being preferred the underdog tag, where the pressure's off them, or maybe the EF Core draw was a wake up call. They've learned their lessons, and that's going to be the approach that they have for the rest of the season. Because if that version of Elfsborg plays regularly like that again, no one's going to touch them, in my opinion. I was highly impressed with them. I think Djurgården hardly had a shot on target in the whole game. I mean, that's remarkable. Like, defensively, Elfsborg can defend. They really can keep it tight if they want to, and I think that's their biggest strength. So got to say they've massively impressed me as well, Jonathan. I mean, just before we move on, what do you think happened? What went wrong in that EF Core game? Because a lot were saying, "Oh, it's a derby." Was it as simple as that? Do you think?
I think every team has a wobble every now and then. I didn't think they were that great, and that's going to be the big question now. Is going to be like, I think there will be games between now and the end of the season, Steve, where I think I still feel like they're going to drop points at times. My final question about them is how do they handle that favourites tag? Because, like I said, if they beat Häcken this weekend, they're going to be 7 points clear with a game in hand on Häcken, and obviously depending on the Malmö result, they could be 7 points clear of Malmö as well. They're 4 points. They're top of the league by 4 points right now. And we're running out of games now. There's only 13, 14 games left. They play Malmö away on the last day of the season. It might be over by then. Title might be over. So it's quite a tough one to call because I still feel like the pressure tag might get to them at some point. I feel like there might be a couple of games where they unexpectedly drop points. I can't see them just winning 10 in a row or whatever. But like you said, the way they're playing at the moment, I didn't think they'd score against Djurgården, to be honest. I thought it might be maybe like a 2-1 Djurgården or 1-1 at best. Maybe just a narrow 1-1 win for Diff. So you have to really take into account how impressive that is. An interesting side note on that match, it was Rami Kayeb's debut for Djurgården. Obviously, he's the left back who's been brought to replace Elias Anderson. And he's a former Elfsborg player. And before the game, he said in the pre-match interview, he said, "It's a wonderful occasion to be playing my former club." I don't think he felt that at the end of that game because not a great debut against his former team. He got the runaround basically, and so did the rest of that team. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned, Steve, that you were watching the beginning of this match. I mean, they were 3-0 up by 42 minutes. Total domination. And I don't even think Kim Bergström turned up to the post-match press conference. I think he sort of sent his joint manager. So that pretty much tells you everything you need to know. I think he was fuming. So, yeah, really good week for Elfsborg. And obviously, we're going to talk about Malmö in a minute. And, they've dropped more points as well.
Really killer result for Djurgården. If Djurgården had won that game, some might say they're back in the title race even. So really, really disappointing from them. They were just completely pulverised, though. Didn't get near them. Couldn't lay a glove on Elfsborg in this game, which was pretty sensational from Elfsborg's perspective. It was a bit of a weird round in terms of results in Allsvenskan. There was a lot of low-scoring games. In fact, only one match both teams scored in, and that was the Monday fixture, Sirius Mjällby. We're going to talk about that actually a bit later. But there were a couple of 0-0s, and one of them was Core against Malmö. And, well, here we go again. I mean, this feels like Groundhog Day, doesn't it, really, in terms of crowd situations, matches being abandoned halfway through and then resumed. And, I mean, this seems to be a continual theme in certain Allsvenskan games. Smoke everywhere. Tell us the story behind the fixture, and also what did you make of the football on show?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that we love Swedish football, Steve, is because it's the passion of the league. Like, you can never take away the tifos, and there's an element to love about the flares and the fireworks. Like, you can't. I feel like you can't remove that, but I think you also have to measure it to a certain degree. Like, I feel like, I mean, there is a long-running battle between Swedish fans and like the police and the authorities in Sweden. You mentioned that kind of rebel streak, maybe from Norway fans with VAR. There's a definite rebel streak in Swedish football fans. Like there's a long-running battle against the authorities trying to clamp down on fan behaviour. And I sort of side with the fans on that, to be honest. Like, I think that football's an expression of passion, joy. But I do also think that fans have a bit of a duty to not go over the top, maybe, and not, maybe just sort of, I'm not going to say respect, but keep in mind that there's other fans who aren't necessarily, as vocal in that sort of thing. And, they don't want to be sitting there waiting for half an hour delays every week or whatever. It seems to be with AIK. I can think off the top of my head of at least four or five occasions in the last year or so, maybe 2 years since we've been doing this podcast, like, where games have been stopped, games nearly abandoned. The Djurgården AIK derby in May, that ended in a similar way. Fans throwing things onto the pitch. I believe in this match, this was all started because I think a Malmö banner was stolen by AIK fans, and basically unveiled by their fans. That kind of like ultras. there's that ultras culture, isn't there, of like stealing other fans' memorabilia or stealing their flags and stuff like that, and kind of parading it in front of your fans to sort of say like we're the dominant, ones in that fan rivalry. And of course, the two huge clubs. I think that's pretty much what happened. Basically, fans ran onto the pitch. I have to say the security at Friends Arena, sometimes I'm like, what is going on? Because there was one guy, Steve, who had like he had his sliders on. Like when you're doing odd jobs and you put those like plastic little bags on your feet to sort of like keep your carpet clean or whatever.
Yeah.
He had blue sliders on, and a little sort of like Dennis the Menace sort of balaclava on his head, black and yellow, and a few pounds on him. And he's charged through the security. He's smashed into one of the police who's just fallen on the floor, a female policewoman. He smashed through another one and just basically ran onto the pitch. Like, it wasn't even that difficult. I think you'd have more trouble getting through, I don't know, customs at a children's tea party than getting onto the pitch at the Friends Arena. It's a bizarre situation. But yeah, the CEO of AIK said this is a failure, that it's turned out like this. Malmö have said we'll take full responsibility for any punishments that are dished out. The game was nearly called off. It was delayed for at least 30 minutes. I think we had a friend of the pod was there as well at the game, and he sort of DM'd us and said what had gone on and things like that. And Henry Rydström came afterwards and said he hates the gunshots and the fireworks and that kind of thing. He says, I hate it. I'm terrified of the gunshots. But he obviously was saying he needs to focus. It really did kill what had promised to be quite an exciting game, actually. And what I've noticed, Steve, as well. One thing I've noticed, like, there's two things I want to say about this. Number one, I don't get why games just, like, at some point they're going to have to say when this happens, like, hey, okay, you're the home side, you've lost 3-0, like, you forfeit the game. Like, you get to a point, game forfeited, see you later. Like, I feel like that's what's going to have to happen at some point with someone, because maybe like a traffic light system, if this happened 3 times, because you don't want to see the players punished as well, the management. But I almost feel like there's nothing else what else is going to actually change this? And it could get dangerous. Like, there is a safety issue. The other thing that I found quite strange about it, Steve, is like it really ruined the game that had a lot of potential to be a good game. And one thing I've noticed about AIK, when they sort of like have these incidents, the tempo of the match after the restart is completely flat. Like, I've noticed there was loads of empty seats in the stand. There's still a good 20-30 minutes to play. Massive game for Henning Berg, he's new manager. Do you know what I mean? That they would have been well up for that match. I thought. I actually fancied AIK to win this game, and they were sort of building momentum. They weren't amazing. I thought Malmö were the better team in possession. They had better possession play. But AIK were in the match, and I felt like once they were building sort of some momentum, and then after the restart, it's like the entire atmosphere was flat. There's no cheering from AIK fans. Half the fans, at least a good chunk of the fans, had left or been relocated or chucked out or whatever. I just felt like the tempo completely dropped, and I was like, this doesn't actually benefit AIK as a team. Like, it's not benefiting the team. I saw Malmö were the far better team after the restart and nearly won. Pontus Jansson, as I mentioned, hit the post, and Nassi had quite a good shot that nearly went in. So I just wonder from an AIK point of view, like, if they're not going to clamp down on this themselves, like, at some point you have to wonder, because there's a sort of pride about it, and I think a lot of AIK fans seem to be sort of quite loving it, to be honest, and enjoying it. But I was thinking to myself, you're in a relegation battle, like, I do get that side, the fan side of it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not someone who's like some curmudgeonly guy who wants to sort of rule that out, but I just felt like, for other fans who are just sitting there, paid their ticket, and want to get on with their day or whatever, it's a bit, I don't know, I find it a bit strange.
I agree. I think this is a continual theme with especially the Stockholm clubs, especially AIK. I mean, you're right about the security. Be a prime spot, wouldn't it, for just Stop Oil to get on the pitch? They'd have no problems getting through there.
They'd have a field day.
They really would, literally would. And I agree. I think after the restart, there was a flat atmosphere, and Malmö probably should have won the game. There was one really good save from Norfelt. Can't remember who had the shot about the 70th minute. I thought that was it, and it was a sensational save. And in the end, I think Malmö probably should have won the match. But yeah, this is getting a bit tedious now. I think in Holland, the clubs are on a last warning for this sort of stuff. The incidents that go in, like Feyenoord, Ajax, and PSV, Ajax, whenever they play. I'm pretty sure that the next time it happens, that there's going to be zero tolerance from the authorities. The match is off. if there's a delay, you're not coming back on. Now, I don't know what they're going to do in terms of the match result. I think the match might end up getting replayed potentially, but or if it ends up like point sanctions and stuff, the only other thing they can do is not have any away fans in at all for these fixtures. That's the only thing that can change, and may well have to change.
No, I would hate that. That's like France. I really hate that.
Well, that's what they have to do in France, you know. Yeah, they've had to. So I don't know, because you can't keep this can't keep happening, can it? Because it's a bit too regular for for nothing to be done. So a shame. Just gone a bit over the line. That's the problem, isn't it? You know, there's a line and the problem is too much.
The problem is the point didn't suit either team.
No.
I felt there was a game to be won there. I thought that both teams could have won that match and really kickstarted like the second half of their seasons. AAK have looked slightly improved in recent weeks, obviously beating Varberg last week, but they're still getting under the new management. They've got a lot of new signings to bed in. They needed like a statement win against the Malmö to really properly get out of that relegation zone. And for Malmö, Steve, there's 2 points dropped that they need that win. I mean, I think Pontus Jansson came out post-match and said, we need wins. I don't think he's won a game since he joined the club. So, like we just discussed Elfsborg, they're falling away in Malmö at this point, and the season's threatening to get away from them if they're not careful. Because, as I mentioned, Big Six question, they do miss Larsen in that midfield. They do miss Anders Christiansen. Keith Tellen's gone a bit flat. Like the player who you mentioned had that shot, that was Jorgensen, the new signing, obviously from Denmark. I think it was his first start. And he looked decent, but they are they're not firing on all cylinders right now. That was a real chance to sort of go and win the game and sort of carry on your momentum. Didn't suit either team. I thought that all that fan stuff, and ultimately could come back to haunt both sides. Imagine if AIK end up in the relegation playoff because of 1 point or whatever, 2 points. So could go back to haunt both sides.
It certainly could. We will move on now to a question from Varsen at Oscar Holt 1991. Appreciate this one. Unsurprisingly, it perhaps is related a little bit to Kalmar. Another round in Sweden, more controversial decisions by the referee. Do you think referees have a hidden agenda to get VAR to Allsvenskan as well? Now, this is mostly in regard to Kalmar against Varberg match where former guest on the podcast, Ricardo Friedrich, got sent off. I have my own opinions on this. I'll tell about it in a minute. But, I mean, this is also Kalmar beat Varberg 1-0. We've got a few things to say about this whole match in general, haven't you, Jonathan? Varberg in particular. Just take us through the match, take us through the incident. And then in terms of the VAR thing, is there a hidden agenda to try and get it in?
Yeah, shout out to Wasson, of course. I'm sure he's missing some Kalmar content this season. I know we've been a little bit more quiet on them than the Rydström years where we tended to talk about them almost every week, didn't we, really? They were so good at certain times. The Henrik Jensen era is slightly slower. I think they're still going for that position game, but I think it's with a little bit less intensity. I think I'm right in saying they've got the lowest XG in the league before this weekend. And obviously a lot of people captain Rajovic. I took him out of my team, and I was actually worried at one point because I thought he's going to... I was sort of floating between he's either going to get a hat trick or he's going to blank, if you know what I mean. Either he fills his boots or he's not. He's on a bit of a scoring drought. And in terms of the flow of the game, Kalmar had the ball. I feel like they're a slower version of Rydström's Kalmar. Like they still got the similar patterns of play. Still want to play through the third. Still play through the midfield and things like that. Quite nice to watch, but I feel like it's like watching Kalmar last season on -2 speed or something like that. Just a little bit of intensity at times. They need to up the tempo. And I don't feel like they have that at the moment. At times. Sometimes when it works, it looks great, but I think they're still trying to find that balance. But yeah, the key incident of this match, Steve, was obviously the sending off for Friedrich. He'd just come back from a sending off. He got sent off against Elfsborg in that 4-0 defeat. And obviously, the difference between Elfsborg going up down to 10 men against... The difference between Elfsborg having 10 men, a man extra against Kalmar, and Varberg boys having an extra man against Kalmar. I mean, it's like the North Pole to the Amazon or something, the rainforest. I mean, I've never, honestly, we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, Friedrich has come off as, Friedrich is he's like an Andre Onana type. He's a very offensive goalkeeper. He'll come out for a situation. He's aggressive. He did it a couple of minutes before the red card. Comes flying off his line. He'll charge out if there's any sort of ball over the top. He's not afraid to do that. And this one he mistimed, obviously caught his man on the edge of the box, and the ref gave a red. I was quite surprised it was a red, but I could see the rationale behind it. Some people, of course, I think Weston tweeted us saying he's dive. It's a dive. Kalmar fans were furious. I saw a lot of Kalmar fan tweets. Discovered a few more Kalmar accounts actually from that, because they were getting mad on Twitter, calling out the ref, saying he's a disgrace and stuff like this. And for me, it's a 50-50 Reddit, in my opinion. I think I could see the reason for it, but I think if there was VAR in Sweden, we would have been sitting there for about 2-3 minutes on that one, maybe 5 minutes. And that, at the end of the day, it's like, do you want that or do you not want that? I suppose that is the core issue here. Like, you either want to have a 5 minute or massive loads of replays and get the right decision, or you just allow the referee to make mistakes every now and then, and we have a faster game. It did turn into a long delay actually, because Friedrich was really unhappy. He complained. It was a long discussion. He was fuming. I think the other player was Brazilian as well, so I think he went to him, had a few words, a bit like, you've done me there, mate. Don't think he was pleased. And obviously the incident eventually came on. But Steve, I have to say, I mean, Varberg boys, they're fighting for their life. They've got an extra man, 10 men. Kalmar still dominated the ball. I had to think to myself. I think there's only one other game I can remember where a team had 10 men and played worse. And I can't remember the actual game, but I can kind of remember the same anger, if you get what I mean. Like, I remember one incident a couple of years ago where it was similar, but they just did nothing with it, Varberg boys. I mean, even I think it was Lindner came out after the match and said, we gave the game away. He said, like, we just switched off. We weren't bothered. Like, he basically called out his players himself. He was just like, we didn't really care. And that's how it looks, Steve. I mean, they didn't. It's probably the worst coach game I've seen. I mean, we talked about Degerfors a lot this season, but this was a poorly coached match, in my opinion. I know their sort of manager situation is very, up in the air with Persson leaving, but they just look like they did not have a clue what to do with against 10 men. There are too many men back. They still played 5 at the back against 1 striker. You've got an extra man. What are you doing? They still allowed Kalmar to overload the midfield. It's like, you've got an extra man. What are you doing? They seem to sort of have massive gaps between the defence and midfield. And I was just thinking, like, all you need to do is flood the midfield. You've got an extra man and just fill your boots. Like, you need to win this match. And then to go and top it off, I thought, okay, maybe they'll get a clean sheet and a point. It won't be a great result, but point's a point. And then out of nowhere, some clown, Steve. I mean, there was Maxime Sante, I think it is. I don't think he gave the pen away, but I was watching him during this match. He was like a bull in a china shop. He should have probably got sent off himself. He was charging into players, just like totally needlessly, just smashing into players and stuff like. You've got an extra man, just have the composure. I know he's a young player, but he kind of epitomised Kalmar. It was just like Varberg. It's like we don't know what to do against 10 men. And then out of nowhere, they go and give away the most stupid penalty you'll ever see. Like, no need at all for it. And obviously, Seymour Scrab scores it, and they win 1-0 Kalmar, and they felt vindicated because of the referee situation. But to me, that was Varberg boys down for me. Like, that was the one game that you need a point here at minimum. You've got tough fixtures coming up. You need points on the board at this stage. Like, if you're really going to get out of this battle, they played really well against the FK away in the previous match. Obviously, should have won and conceded a soft penalty, in my opinion. It wasn't a penalty, in my opinion. But this was the time to get, just build a bit of momentum, get a win, or get some points. Like, they took off Rajovic even, and it was like Kalmar didn't really have anything really. They were really struggling, even though they had a lot of the ball. But I just thought from Varberg, this was like a 101 class in like how not to coach a team that's got an extra man. It's like fear in their eyes. No real someone just to put their foot on the ball and say, listen, we got the extra man, we're just going to pop it around. Just nothing really. And to me, that was the game where Varberg go down. Like, I still think they might battle for it. I don't think they're that bad. Maybe they've improved slightly in recent weeks. But I just think that was like the way they kind of just let the game go. It was almost like we're not massively bothered really. Like, it's kind of like we're accepting our fate, if you know what I mean. It wasn't like a roll your sleeves up performance. And I was really disappointed with Varberg, I have to say.
Yeah, I agree with. I'm really struggling to see how Varberg can possibly stay up. I thought they were really, really poor against IECOR the week before as well. But this red card for me, it was a clear dive, in my personal opinion. I think it was really poor officiating. Also, now again, I'm not one to profess to know the exact laws of football, the rules of football now, but there were 3 covering defenders at the time that Friedrich made the foul. Now, is it an absolute given and automatic that a goalkeeper has to be sent off, even if that is a stonewall foul, if there's covering defenders, or a goalkeeper is like a different species and they're treated differently? So for me, there was a lot of doubt with that decision, but it didn't do Varberg any good, did it? I think Kalmar, it made them so angry. They played better after the red card. Rajovic, I was one of those that captained him this week. I actually backed him any time to score. He did actually have a chance in the first half with a header, which I think he should have done better with. But he worked his socks off up front against a really physical team, and I think that's why he was taken off, because he put in such a strong shift. But yeah, interesting game there with Cal. You actually make a really good point about the XG. That's incredibly low. 0.95 XG per 90 minutes, second lowest in the league. Only Halmstad have it worse. That's worrying. They're not creating enough chances, Kalmar, but they are up there in the table. Sixth place. Yeah, sixth place. So are they kind of overachieving a bit?
I think they are. I think there's a lot of teams. I mean, I couldn't believe when Norrköping got that late winner against Degerfors that I think they're fifth.
Yeah, Norrköping have fifth. Yeah,
I couldn't believe that. I was like, what is going on? I think from sort of fifth to ninth, 10th, there's a lot of sort of you can draw straws really who finishes where. I think there's a few teams that are kind of like, they're nearly safe, and it's kind of like just play out the season. I feel because I don't think Norrköping are the fifth best team in the league, to be honest. But at the moment they are in terms of the table. I agree with you on Kalmar in terms of. I think personally with Rajovic, you put him in a good team. If I was AIK or Malmö, I'd sign him tomorrow. I think if you put service in his way, he'll be a serious player. I feel like there's a real talent there, but I don't think he gets the service. So I think that's where it goes wrong for him a little bit. I still think at some point he's going to bang in a hat trick, but I really feel like he'd be a strong player. Imagine Malmö signed him. Like,
he's getting frustrated. Don't you think he's getting frustrated? I watch him.
Imagine him around the nasty, sort of like Taha Ali. Like, I reckon he's a proper fox in a box, like number 9, who can do a bit of everything. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, Wasson's not going to want us touting their players, but I think he might be preparing himself for Europe, because if there's some eyes on him in the European games, it would not surprise me if he gets a big move. But I just feel like he's a bit misprofiled, like he's gone on a long drought now. And I just feel like he's not maybe getting the service to justify the player he is. I still really like him. I think he's a top prospect. So, yeah.
Yeah. We're going to finish off the show by talking about two teams who don't get a lot of, well, maybe sometimes they do get certain airtime on the Nordic Football Podcast. Certainly one of these teams doesn't get an awful lot. Sirius against Mjällby. I didn't actually watch this game. It was on Monday evening. Someone asked me for a prediction early in the day on a DM, and I said 0-0, don't bother watching it. But it turned out to be a cracker, 3-2 win for Mjällby, and it's an interesting game, Jonathan. What do you make of it?
Well, firstly, I hope whoever DM'd you didn't take that advice, because it was a massive overs game. I watched it, and I mean, I tweet after the match. I think I worry for Sirius actually, because they've got a decent manager. I think he was a former Bromma Poikina manager, got them promoted, and he's left obviously Mathiasen. And he's got them playing some quite nice stuff actually. I think he's onto something in terms of playing style. They're not that bad to watch. When it fires and when it works, they look very nice. They even gave Elfsborg. They did a similar thing against Elfsborg, Steve. Like they kind of dominated them at times, and then they just conceded 2 late goals and lost the game. I think it was 4-3, and it was like all that effort for nothing almost. And I remember the manager, he dropped to his knees when the fourth goal went in. He was like absolutely devastated. He looked so upset at the final whistle. He looked crestfallen, and he must have been feeling a similar way today, because Mjällby, they were okay, but they're just that solid team, aren't they? They've obviously got Jacob Bergström, we'll talk about in a minute. One of my favourite players, probably in Allsvenskan at the moment. But I think with Sirius, Steve, I just talked about the table there, sort of from 5th to 11th. Sirius is the sort of team, if they're not careful, they could get sucked into that relegation battle, because I don't think EFK are down yet. I think there's going to be something to say for AIK and EFK. And if you look at that table, you've only got sort of Degerfors really around there, and maybe 1 or 2 others. But Varnamo are sort of starting to climb out of it. That was a massive problem for EFK, that Varnamo win, because they're 9 points behind Varnamo now. And that's probably someone they think maybe they may be able to catch. So that's going to be tricky. And if you look at Sirius in the table, Steve, I mean, you'll tell me the exact position, but they're sort of falling into it, and they're not a team that can see out a result. I mean, the news broke tonight. Jamie Roche is obviously leaving. He's going to Switzerland, Steve. He's following where you went on holiday. I think he's off to Lausanne, but I don't know if you went there. But he's someone in midfield who did a lot of dirty work and was quite rugged, and I felt they missed him tonight. And they're just quite porous and easy to play against. They seem to do so much work, play so much nice football. You think to yourself, they've created 4 or 5 chances here. They should be comfortable in the game. They went 1-0 up, conceded a soft penalty, and then it was like kind of they went behind. They got back into it, and then they went behind again. And it's like it's a similar feeling, like they've made loads of effort in this match. They play some nice stuff. They look good. They've scored 2 goals. Like their patterns of play are not bad, but they've got it's like the Anne Robinson. You leave with nothing. So if they don't sort that out, because that's at home as well, and going away is different, isn't it? It's a different kettle of fish. So I feel like if they're not careful, they could get sucked into it, because of course they're going to sell their best players. Steve, they've got a young lad at the back, Malcolm Yang, I believe it is. He's just signed, I think, a 5-year deal. He's 16, 17, centre back. But he made a howler for the last goal. And I have to say, I don't even blame him. If I was 16 playing against Jacob Bergstrom, I'd be making howlers as well, because he must have been terrified. The poor lad. He's barely old enough to go and watch like an 18+ movie. Well, he's not. So the sight of 6'4" Bergstrom charging at you probably was what made him make that error for the 3rd goal, because he basically just gave the ball away and just ran out the way pretty much of Bergstrom and just said, like, mate, I don't want to get involved. Like, you just take the goal and get out of my way, please. So it was a really comical moment. I think he'll learn from that. But the point I'm making is when you're playing sort of 17-year-olds at centre back, like, they're going to make mistakes, and it's just like, do you accept that in your team? And it could ultimately cost them, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes it's a balance between trying to develop young players, but also realizing that they're going to make mistakes, and at times it's going to cost you games. And he did make, unfortunately, the error that cost them the match.
A very good win for Mjällby, of course. That's actually the 5th time in a row they've beaten Sirius. So there's something about that matchup that they like against this Sirius side, who can be a bit soft sometimes, no doubt. But I watched them the previous week. Hammer Degerfors 3-0, and they could have had 5 or 6. And when the football's good, it is very good. But there's always one team that gets sucked into it. Even Degerfors this week, to be fair, actually did try and show some resistance. So if they're not careful, Sirius might get themselves in trouble. Jacob Bergstrom, you're a big fan of him, aren't you? He's got something about him, big personality. Got us talking, didn't it, off air about big personalities up in Scandinavia. Actually, I just want to kind of link it to a question as well that has been submitted. It's a little bit slightly different. Who is the most underrated Allsvenskan player, and who is the most overrated? That was by John Sebastian. But yeah, I mean, does Bergstrom, is he an underrated player?
That's left field, because that's coming in before we've gone on air, isn't it? I think just as we've gone on air. I mean,
that is one of those where I've caught you out a little bit there. But you're a
if
man.
If we've got time, we've got a question if EFK will win the Super 18, but I think that's tongue in cheek from Marek Wadas. I do like the question from also Jimmy Driver about which player would you pick for anyone in the world. So maybe ask me that to finish the show. But most underrated player in Allsvenskan.
It might be one.
You've thrown me with that one.
I really have thrown you.
You got anyone for Norway?
Well, again, I might need a week to decide that.
Yeah, you've thrown
underrated player. There's always loads out there, isn't there, that you think of, but off the hand, then you just one of those you probably need about a good 15 minutes to think about. Really, there was a great question from Jimmy Driver, like you said. But he said it's a bit of a fancy question. But if you could pick one player in the world to join Eliteserien or Allsvenskan, who would it be, and in which team would you put them in?
I've got an answer for this one, actually, so I'll come back to the other one. But I love this question, so I had to think about it. I'm going to put Anthony Elanga in Beko Häcken's team. I think he'd be perfect Benny Troyer replacement. I think he would absolutely destroy Allsvenskan. I know he's obviously about to leave Man United, which is a shame, because I do quite like him as a player, but seems Ten Hag doesn't fancy him. But I could just see him at Beko Häcken. Like, he'd fit in that front three. He'd be an absolute. I thought about Haaland, but he's Norwegian, so I was like, I'll let you have Haaland, like, surely. But as a bit of a left field one, I'm going to pick Anthony Elanga. He's Swedish, and I feel like he'd really suit Häcken. He'd fill his boots. He'd be top scorer in the league. It would be beautiful to watch, and he'd probably get a big move to I don't know, Man United or Nottingham Forest.
Do you know, I'm actually not going to go Haaland. I'm going to go Martin Odegaard at Glimt. I think he'd be brilliant there. The technical ability of Odegaard, along with his personality, actually, I think would really fit in with the Buda Glimt system. He'd have a lot of fun playing
I like that.
at Buda Glimt, wouldn't he? I mean, Haaland, you could put him anywhere. I mean, imagine putting Haaland in like the worst team in. Imagine putting Haaland at Varberg Boys. How would they do? Would he get anything?
Nah.
What would he do?
Honestly, if you put Haaland at Varberg Boys in yesterday's match, he'd be under police charges for assault because he would 100% have physically assaulted at least 4 of those players because he would have been so frustrated about the lack of effort. He would have been fuming. You know, when you've got a really sort of like wants to win player, he'd have been going mad in that changing room. So it would be quite funny, but I don't think he'd get much service, to be honest. In terms of most underrated player, you know what, I might actually say Bergstrom. I mean, his goal record isn't amazing, but the move to Djurgården just didn't work out for him. So I'm going to sort of like a little bit of, sitting on the fence a little here because I'm just going to go back to talking about Bergstrom. But the move obviously to Djurgården has not worked out, but he is a handful. And like he will keep Mjällby. Like Mjällby aren't going to go down, and he will get a fair share of goals. Like he's a physical specimen. He's brilliant in interviews. He's like what Victor Edvardsson would dream about. I mean, if you see the interview you did after the game today, it was. I don't even speak Swedish, Steve, and I was just listening. I was just watching it and laughing to myself. I couldn't even understand what he's saying, but I was just like his facial expressions. Like the interviewer was laughing. Do you know what I mean? Like he had this massive grin on his face. I read the translation post-match for what he'd said, and apparently the Mjällby fans actually gave him a lot of stick, and they booed him on his return to Mjällby because obviously it didn't work out at Djurgården. I don't understand why they signed him when they already had Edvardsen anyway, and 2 or 3 other strikers. He was never really going to get much game time, but apparently he's a massive Djurgården fan, so it was a personal dream for him. He went back, and obviously he got booed from the Mjällby fans, but when he scored the goal, Steve, he ran into the away and jumped all over them. And he was basically saying that, you know, he had to take a bit of stick. So he was like, I'm going to sort of make it up to them for that one. And big grin on his face. And as I said before, Steve, I can never forget the time where he jumped for a header, smashed into the crossbar, and the whole goal frame came off worse than him. But the goal frame had to nearly be replaced. He broke part of the goal frame. He's that much of a unit. And as I say, I don't envy Malcolm Yang having to defend against him as a teenager because he's about literally 3 times the size of him. So, I don't think he's the best. He's not like the best talent in the league or anything like that. He's a bit of a workhorse, but he's the kind of committed player. He's the kind of player Varberg could do with. Do you know what I mean? Someone up front like that who just really, really cares, puts in a massive shift, 100%. He's a proper Torstensson player. I bet Anders Torstensson loves him. You know, I bet he really respects him. His work rate is kind of precision, and he also just looks to me like I bet he's really good around the dressing room. You know what I mean? He strikes me as someone who's like, you want to go to training and just hang around him, if you know what I mean. He's someone like that who just spreads a bit of enthusiasm, which you need if you're a smaller team. Do you know what I mean? Someone who's going to commit to it and, you know, not be sort of like negative if things aren't going your way. He looks like someone like that who's just has a bit of personality. He's got a cheeky smile. So yeah, I'll say him for now, but I might come back to that next week.
Yeah, we're talking about this actually on. I was watching a bit of the Ashes, the cricket recently, and Mark Wood for England is that sort of infectious character. For those who do follow a bit of cricket, I'm sure there's several listeners are saying, cricket, what's that? But yeah, someone like Mark Wood, infectious characters who are just great for dressing rooms. I'm going to go with a couple of underrated players in the Eliteserien. I'm actually going to say Zlatko Tripic at Viking. Perhaps he is rated, I think, but perhaps not as much as he should be. And at Molde, I've always liked Christopher Hogan, the left wing back. Everyone always bangs on about Martin Linez on the other side, and Linez deserves a lot of credit. But I think Christopher Haugen is always there and chips in with goals and assists. And I think he's actually had a really good last 18 months. So that will do it for this episode, Jonathan. It's been a bumper length Nordic football podcast. We've got through loads of questions, loads of topics, and yeah, absolutely mammoth episode, mate.
Yeah, a beast of an episode, but we've got a beast of a schedule coming up with Europe. So, of course, keep an eye on that. We've made our predictions. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast for our bonus content. Of course, Acre Adams, Benny Traore, and other content. And, of course, the YouTube and YouTube, obviously, Nordic Football Podcast. Research it. And I think Twitter's called X these days, isn't it? It's been renamed. But you can find me on X at JF Football, I think, if they don't do anything else that makes me want to quit the site. And obviously you're at Meat Man Soccer. So, and obviously the podcast is at Nordic Foot Pod. So thanks so much for listening. We really always appreciate your support. There's so many questions this season, haven't we, Steve? Like every week it's like
a lot. Yeah, thanks
we have
very
to
much.
pick out the questions because there's so many. So I think the leagues are clearly getting bigger and stronger in terms of. I think people gravitate into the league, aren't they? Like, I feel like maybe some fans who were turned off the Premier League are a bit gravitating towards Scandinavia in some way.
Yeah,
a bit more organic, a bit more no VAR, obviously in one of them. And I just feel like there's a few people who are sort of dipping their toe in this world. So if you're a first time listener, obviously you've done well to get to this point. But do tweet us and let us know, why you're listening and where you're from in the world, and I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, thanks very much for listening, everyone. We'll have to go now, but all the best. Thanks for your support as always. Stay safe, take care of yourself. We'll see you next time. From myself, Steve Wiss, and the X Factor himself, Jonathan Verdugba, it's goodbye.